I don't know if anybody else can hear Charlene.
No.
Still muted.
Yeah, but I'm on,
All right. Now can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm on mute.
All right. All right.
Probably not till like 1 o'clock. Okay.
So anyway, I want to welcome you all. I don't know if you heard anything I had to say, but welcome to the LVAIC Bias Adjuster Program. Happy to have Dr. Bentley here, Dr. Gibson here with us today. Now, learning a new platform. We've all mastered Zoom, so learning a different platform is always fun. Anyway, I want to say that you're just. I'll let Bentley do her own introduction, but you're going to really love this presentation. I ask that everyone keep yourself on mute. You can adjust your view similarly to Zoom up at the top. If you have any questions, you can enter them in the chat box, and between Dana and I will make sure that Bentley sees them or can get to those questions. And I think without further ado, I know we have some folks still popping in, but Bentley, I think I'm going to give it back to you, and you can get started.
Dr. Gibson, you're also on mute.
Oh, can you hear me now? Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for having me. Good morning. I am so excited to be here. More than ever, these trainings that I've been doing in the past couple of weeks have really been important to me. I've been working on this for research-wise since graduate school, but thinking about it since I can remember about thinking. In terms of being an African-American woman growing up in America, right? I grew up, I'm not sure how many people know about Westchester, New York, but like right outside of Manhattan and White Plains, New York. So I grew up very racialized. My parents attended segregated schools in Jim Crow, and I'll talk a little bit more about my experience and talking to me about what they went through. My father integrated schools in Osceola, Georgia, and my mother integrated Harvard Medical School in the 70s. So just that whole experience and them teaching me about my history and what it means to be Black, I think I was thinking about it before I could even talk, actually. So this is really important to me. I've grown up thinking about it. So by the time I got to graduate school, I said, let's just make a career out of this. And implicit bias research at that time when I went to Emory was really starting to grow. It had mostly been done with white people. And there was a gap there in terms of looking at the implicit bias of a diversity of people, and not just with race, but with gender and with sexuality. So I really got into it in grad school, and since then have just been researching what is this thing called unconscious bias, how does it develop, and what's the best ways to tackle it. So that's who I am. We have 1 hour here, and I want to get into the nitty gritty. So I'd like to just start, if everybody can look in the chat. There is a poll there for you to quickly take. If you click it, it should come up, and the question should say, did you watch the CNN special on unconscious bias last night?
I don't.
There's actually a poll for you to click, and I can see where you can just put it in there. Or vote at the same time. Either one. Okay.
See the vote.
The vote is showing. It's about 50-50. So about 50% yes, 50% no. I'll give one more second for folks to see. We're looking at the chat. No. Okay, all right. Well, there was an actual, if you can put yourself on mute, I can try to do it on my side as well. There was a special last night on CNN on unconscious bias. So over the past couple of years, I say especially since Starbucks mandated that their trainees have a training on unconscious bias, it's really been growing. But now with all this tension going on in America, I was really excited to see CNN having a special on unconscious bias. What did not excite me, though, is that they were not really tackling it from a psychological perspective. So this is based in social science research, unconscious bias. There's a lot of research here. They did mention a few studies on it, but they didn't have actual social scientists there and actually let people know what's the best way to get through this. Like, we know racial discrimination exists, especially today. people are hypersensitive to it. But how do we get through this? So that's really what we're going to focus on today. I'd also like you to end the poll, one more poll for you. If you look in the chat, you should see it now. And when you click it, it should say, how old were you when you first observed racial discrimination? So maybe you haven't experienced it, but when did you first start like seeing it? And the options are early childhood, adolescent, adult, or I've not observed racial discrimination. Oh, we have a lot of early. So we're at about 50-50 split with people saying adolescent at 50% and early childhood at 50%. So we don't have many folks in who are just, some people are, and that's okay. That's all right, seeing that this is an issue now, right? Like there's a lot of people who are coming to the table now and saying, we have a problem. I didn't really see it before, but I see it now. But it looks like, according to the room that we have here, and this is good for me to know just who am I talking to, that you have been seeing this, most of you, 50-50, early childhood and adolescent. And I've already given you my story. My first experience with this was in Great Plains, New York, 4 years old, actually. Only Black child in an all-white preschool classroom, and the research is there. These biases, and you learn this in the online training, are developed very early, and children are explicit about it sometimes, right? They're more explicit about it than adults, but it comes out in their nonverbal behaviors, the social distancing, right? You can see this on the playground, and I experienced it then, but interestingly, the best friend that I had at 4 years old in my all-white preschool classroom was a white girl who was larger than the other kids in the classroom. So she was very tall, and she was different in body size than the other children in the classroom. And they distanced themselves from her as well. And it was just like, I don't know if we both picked up on that, but we became best friends out of that, both being parts of negatively stereotyped groups. And now we're in this real like world with people who we're trying to make friends, and nobody really accepted us. So this little Black girl and this other girl who was different in body size came together off of that. So I've been experiencing this since a child. And now it's my job as an expert in this to really help others understand how it develops and what's the best way to get through it. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you all can see it. Everybody good? Thumbs up if you can see it. Awesome. Let's go play from start. So thank you again, Charlene, for bringing me here. This started back when I did a training for Lehigh Valley back before the coronavirus hit. And we wanted this to happen in person. We really did. But once the pandemic hit, I said, let me figure out how to switch this to a virtual platform. So you all are my third, I call it graduating class, from my virtual training online. So this is new for me. I just figured I didn't want to stop just because we have a pandemic going, and not knowing that we would next after have a whole racial social movement going. So I'm glad that I was able to change this to a virtual format. I would love your feedback on it because, again, you're my third graduating class in the virtual format. So please feel free after to let me know your thoughts. But I just wanted to really tell you, first off and foremost, I love this quote here because it says, I don't know what to say or do right now, but I'm here for you and I love you. Right. And I've gotten that from a lot of friends and clients just coming to me like, what do I read? What do I do right now in this time? I want to be there. Right. And so, number one, I'm here for you just as a Black woman. Right. And I've even heard other people saying like, please, I'm tired of people coming to me and asking me what to do. I'm not that person. OK, you can call me. I will. Charlene knows I'm very open and I'm here for you. Personally, just to tell you what I've been through, but also professionally to give you resources and help you get through this here. And just, you know, as human beings, really, we have to come in here with love. I don't know any of you, but Charlene and Dana, right? But I just want you to, as a human experience, come into this with passion and love for each other. What can we do to be change agents individually here. That's the goal. These are difficult times, and people are, I believe, awakening, more so than just the woke people, right, who were already there. But we have a group of people coming in here now who really want to be change agents, but may not know how. And even the CNN special I saw last night were using strategies that research shows is really not the best way to tackle this. So we're going to talk about that. How can you, and you're already here, you've already taken unconscious bias assessments, to know where you are individually, right? And we'll talk more about that test, but from the training, you know a little bit about it. And I want you to feel free, do the time. We really don't have the time to really get into a deep conversation, but please, in the chat, whatever your thoughts are, put them in there and I will address them, whether it be through email and come back to them. And we'll save some time at the end also for questions. I love this chart here because
I hate my background.
I'm sorry. Make sure everybody's muted. Okay, can everybody see the chart here? Good. Raise the hand. Good. So this shows where people are in their growth. And it looks like from the poll that people saying they've been recognizing this since at least early childhood.
No, but I have like this thing back here that's a total mess. It's like in our other ones, we can put up a bird.
There we go. So, back found him. All right. So this shows where people may be in terms of their growth, right? From the poll, it looked like many of you have been recognizing this since early childhood and adolescence. But we have different behaviors that have come with recognizing this. So I used to see all the times just, what's called the comfort zone. Just, I'll like your post on Facebook or, thumbs up, hearts, right? Maybe I'll retweet it, maybe repost it. That's the comfort zone. This fear zone here is, and you'll hear statements, I have gay friends. I have Black friends. This is, I don't see color. I'm colorblind. And unless you are truly colorblind, that is not the case. We can see color, okay? Why did they resist the officer? That wasn't my intention. But I'm not racist. A lot of times I hear that oftentimes when people take implicit bias tests and they may receive the result that says you have an unconscious white bias. And then their first instinct is to say, but wait a minute, I'm not racist. And I have to tell them that this test is not measuring whether or not you're racist. It's measuring your cognitions, your thoughts, just your quick instinctive gut reaction to groups. It's not measuring behavior, right? And being racist is a behavior, and we'll get more into that. From my research, anytime I've tested unconscious bias attitudes and heard these statements, I can almost predict, I'd almost put all the money in my bank account, what they will score on the unconscious bias test. I have Black friends, that I'm not racist. They're not neutral. Colorblind, for sure. Almost every time I hear I'm colorblind, I don't really see color. I have Black friends. When they take the unconscious bias test, it doesn't come out that way. The learning zone, I realized that I was speaking from a place of guilt. I want equity, okay? My pronouns are. So now we've learned some things, right? But what are we doing? The growth zone is about action. Great, you put out a statement saying you care about equity. That's wonderful, okay? But now what are you going to do? And so that's really where we want to get to. Behaviors. You're here to become an advocate. That's the goal. There's no way you can truly become an advocate. I don't care if it's racism. I don't care if it's sexual orientation, bias against women, unless the first step is understanding the issues, understanding the self. Well, where am I in this? How do I think about these groups? Who are my friends? Who am I hiring? What am I consuming in terms of what am I reading, watching? And then you can get over here to this place we all want to be, our champions, like true allies for this. They're going beyond just liking posts, simple things that are not really going to make changes here, right? So the goal is to get to these changes. And understanding what the difference between these concepts are. A bias is an evaluation for a group. It's a thought, okay? Do thoughts always go with behaviors? No. Sometimes they do, especially not when we're not conscious of them or in our right mind. So we want to be aware of these unconscious biases. It's not impossible to become conscious of the unconscious brain, right? And if we're not taking those tactics to do that, then we're going to stay in the same place, and we're not going to get to the bottom line of solving diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? Diversity being, okay, let's get the people here. Great. Let's get women here. Let's get Black people here. Let's get lesbian, gay, transgendered, gay. Let's get them at the table. Let's get us here. And then what happens though, right? Once we're there, do we feel included? Do we feel like this is where the problem comes in with unconscious bias? And we'll talk about this more in terms of everything from nonverbal expressions to your silence. Silence is deadly these days, especially, will make people feel like they don't even have voice. People don't even, nobody even cares about me. Equity really comes out in the practices, right? So you get the people there diversity wise. Do they feel included? Are you paying them the same, right? Are you promoting them the same? Who have you promoted? Do they all look a certain type of way? Are they all the same way? That's where this unconscious bias comes out in the research. So a lot of people like to say, oh, this little EI test, it doesn't mean anything. There's no meaning behind it. And that's where I think CNN went wrong a little bit yesterday in terms of what does it mean to have an unconscious bias based off of research? It's great. You talked about this in the online training in terms of what explicit bias is. Great. We don't have to go over this. You know, it's about what people say, what people think they think. We have to get beyond what you think, how you think you are, or you think you're a good person. That's great. If you really want to be a good person, you have to get past things that you may not even be aware of going on in your brain. You have to get past that notion of just, I'm not biased. There's no way I could be biased. That is stopping people from really getting to the part of their brain which most of us function on, right? Like we can't think about everything at one time or we'd be crazy. So the unconscious brain is really driving us for most things that we're doing. Driving, for example, right? Like if you think about when you're driving, if you were conscious of every little thing you were doing, you'd run into something. Right? So a lot of us is just on autopilot, especially for things that we're doing on a regular basis. We get in trouble with this when we're doing this with human beings, right? We think we know everything, right? Based off of what we've seen in our own little worlds. And that's why it's really good to get past this explicit self-report. Social scientists realized that a long time ago. And let's get real tricky here. Let's get spiffy and go past asking people what their biases are and just see, can they just easily see people swiftly with good or bad words as positive or negative. It's a reaction time test. You've learned this from the online training. I don't have to go through this with you. It is taking into account how quickly you pair good or bad words with groups of people. It doesn't matter if it's black, white, and I love this here. You learned this in the online training. Use this for people. I've had trainees take this image here to show others what this test is doing. And when they see it like this, oh, it's just magic. All of a sudden, they get it. They don't want to tear down the test anymore. They say, oh, this test makes sense. Flowers and insects, good and bad. Yes, of course, people would react quicker with flowers and good words. So when they see it like this, taking out that social group element, there's less of a defensiveness. I've also done research to look at how people respond to the gender test versus the race test. So you get your results back. It says you have a white bias. Same person gets the results back. Says they have a bias for males in the workplace or males in science. Then you ask them to reflect on that. And the same person will tear down the test for the race test. But when asked to reflect on their gender biases, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. The world sees men like this. It's unbelievable. The rejection that people have when taking their unconscious race bias test. And so it's really about getting rid of that defensiveness. And the way you help people to get rid of that, I found, is have them take multiple tests, especially me as a Black woman. I just can't come in there and say, hey, just take the race test. Doesn't work like that. Especially for people who have dominant group attitude. So this is very helpful if you want. I've had trainees take it, show people, and then they understand the concept. I had a white bias. You learned that in the training when I first took it from White Plains, New York. That's what's going into, I can predict what people are going to get on this test after studying it for so long. I already told you based off the things coming out of their mouths. But then if I have the time to associate with them, I can also see nonverbal behaviors. But based off of these 3 points right here, I asked people where they grew up, the types of schools that they went to, in terms of racial demographics, what's their personality. So you all were able to take some of these while you were doing the online course. I had you do that. It's like a self-assessment because I found through research that these go directly into how you score on an unconscious bias test. So this is an example of a group of 18 people that I'd studied in an organization. And I was able to, the ones in yellow were the ones I was able to predict what they were going to get on the unconscious race bias test. I don't even know these people. They just told me their early childhood experience in terms of school type, how conscientious they were, so you were able to test yourself on that, as well as how open to new experiences they were. You were able to test yourself on that. Those 2 factors of personality, it's called the Big 5 personality assessment, are directly related to how people score on an unconscious race bias test. So the higher you scored in openness to experience, this means you're open to all new types of things, new information, going new places, doing new things. And there's a spectrum here. The more you are in that personality trait, the less biased people are. Also with conscientiousness, that's just, are you organized? Are you impulsive? Do you think before you act? Goes directly into how people are on an unconscious bias test. And if you think about it, they're in alignment. Conscientiousness, think before I act. Unconscious bias, reaction time, right? So the more you think before you act, the less bound you are to stereotypes. These personality traits you also developed when you were children. So now in order to get past unconscious bias, you have to literally work on your personality, which is not the easiest thing to do. Okay, so we can do it. It's not easy, but if you do it, it can work. Friendship circles as well. You need more than one Black friend, more than one gay friend, more than one woman leader in the workplace friend to really get this. And if you just have one, okay, let it be beyond Facebook. Okay, are they coming to your homes? Is it an intimate relationship? Do your children know them? Have they seen them? Okay, this is very important. In terms of how it goes into the organization. So what I like to do, and it's very important, my clients who are really serious about this, they want to go beyond just, I want to do a training. Trainings are great, but we're getting a bad name for diversity trainings because it doesn't really work like that. It's like a Band-Aid. You come in there, you teach people stuff, but then what change does it actually make? So I like to say, if you really want to see what's happening in the organization and do training that's going to actually address that, you have to do what's called a cultural climate analysis. You have to get in there and see, where are the gaps? Where are the places where white people feel more included than people of color? Where are the places where women feel less included than men? So this is a study that I did that looked at the racial implicit bias of an organization, okay? So you know from the training online that, man, very few people are neutral. Very few people are neutral in any of this stuff. Race, gender, sexuality. Very few people have a bias for Black people. It's just very few. And most people have this white bias. So this organization, they were above average in terms of their racial IAT distribution. Way above average. They actually had a lot of neutral people here. And then in terms of gender, though, they had more male biases. Nobody had a female biases. And this went directly into the disparities in their organization. So, for example, they had less racial bias when we looked at it aggregated. So everybody who took the test, was there more white bias or were people more neutral? We saw that group was pretty neutral, and it went right into what the employees were reporting in terms of how they felt in inclusion. Do you feel your opinion is valued? Do you feel respected? Do you feel you're getting credit? Do you have positive relationships? Have you experienced prejudice or witnessed it? And do you feel your organization is making progress? It's in green, meaning there was not a difference between people who were racial ethnic minorities and white employees, meaning there was not a statistically significant difference between how they reported they felt in terms of inclusion. And that was, I'm telling you, most of the times when I go to do these cultural climate analyses and put them directly onto how the people are feeling, there is a relationship. It was not the same with gender. This organization had stronger biases for males in the workplace, and women in these organizations were saying they felt less included. They felt their opinions were valued less, felt less respected, felt their colleagues were not getting to know them, less feedback. So these unconscious biases that people have in the workplace are directly going into that category of what's called inclusion. Great, you get the people there. But how do they feel when they get there? And we talked about this in the online training. There's very few neutral folks. In terms of body size, very few neutral folks. Very few folks having a bias for larger people. Very few people having a bias for gay people. And these are thousands of people who have taken this assessment. And so it just goes back to this comes out. And in terms of how it plays out in the workplace, it's really very little difference in terms of Black people, women, LGBTQIA community, in terms of how they're reporting feeling included. So lack of feeling respected, you can see that with Black people, women, LGBTQIA. You see the same report of experiences of discrimination in terms of how they're worded, even though they're different groups. And I use that as a tactic to bring people together on this. Okay. You may be a part of a different group, but you do understand what I'm going through because you're going through it too. So that's one way to get people on the same team. What I found in my research is that if you look at this here, experience prejudice, witness prejudice, there's a gap there. So if you look at what men say, they haven't really experienced it and haven't seen it. Women, on the other hand, I've experienced it and I've seen it. And you see the same thing here with race. I've experienced it and I've seen it with people of color, but not so much when it comes to white employees. We have to get on the same page with what it is, what it looks like. It can't just be an issue for people of negatively stereotyped groups. And especially since we're all going through the same similar thing here. So you learn this in the training in terms of African Americans are not the, African Americans are 50-50 split. So white people are not the only people who show an implicit preference for white. You can see this in minorities as well. So some Latinos will show a bias for white. Some African Americans will show a bias for white. You see very few white people, though, who show a bias for Black. Right? So the goal is not to show a bias for Black, not to show a bias for white. How do we get people closer to this neutral place? And that is through research and experiences. Children, you learn this in the training, are very explicit. This study here, and I will send all of these resources to you. Some of them you already have in the training manual. But here, if you look at the implicit biases of children versus explicit, it looks like 6-year-olds. These are all white children. They will tell you how they feel. If you have children, you know the filter is not all the way there yet. I like it because it's white. It's white like me. But as people get older, you start seeing statements, oh no, I don't see color. I'm colorblind. I don't have a bias for my group. But if you look on the unconscious bias level, it stays the same. And why is that? Because we're getting the same information about these social groups. We're not really getting in there with them, right? And so this stays the same. I have to mute somebody. Hold on 1 second. This is a study that I conducted with children. So if you have children, a lot of people have been coming to me saying, how do I talk to them about this? First off and foremost, let's stop really reiterating at such an early age that the status of Black is low. Okay. Even actually in today's society and with what's going on now, telling your children, look, people don't look at Black people very well. Okay, they don't like them, and there's problems going on in our society. There's some mean people out here who don't like Black people. In that message is still, this is a lower status group, and the children are taking that in. So they still could be developing negative attitudes about Black, even though you're coming from a good place and trying to teach them the right thing. It's important that, from my research, I found you get in there and how can you counteract that negative stereotype about them? And so from what I found, that's not happening, not just in America, but across the world. So this study I did in graduate school in the South Pacific and in America, and if you just look at point 3, white preference was found in even Samoan children. Vanuatu, past Samoa, 5 years old, 7 years old. They understood that group status and what it meant to be white. In America, 75% of the 5-year-olds I tested by 5 years old, 75% liked white. And not just for any reason. If you look at point 4, this was when I asked them, well, why do you like this one? You know, they could have said just because. They didn't have that filter yet. So they said because it's white, or because it's Black, or because it's light skinned. Okay, so they would say things like that. The only group of children I tested that had what is called this in-group bias, the bias for their own race, and would give race reasons for it, were white children. So they understand the status of skin color very early, very early. And I'd like to just take a quick, I wish I had longer with you, I really do. But I'm going to show you my screen for Netflix, and I hope you can see it. Let me. Can you see all this here? Let me see if yes. Get some hands up, thumbs up.
Yes.
Good. Okay, so if your children have Netflix, and mine, I have to battle with this all the time. I have a 6-year-old. She wants to watch Netflix, and so I'm like, oh gosh, now I'm going to have to counteract it. I'm going to have to go get some books and some more stuff because you turn this on, and it's right there. And don't be a little African-American boy or heck, an Asian boy, and look for somebody that looks like you. Okay, and even when we do have a little Black child here, a Black boy, it's called Motown Magic. I've actually watched this, and it's actually showing an African-American boy good, but it's also a stereotypical image in terms of music and musicality, right? So even when you find things that may have a person of color there, what's the message in it, right? Is it about just racism and discrimination and oppression, right? Are we just talking Martin Luther King and slavery and Motown Magic? Or do we have something there that's talking about women in STEM and Black people in STEM and actually taking that stereotype down? If you're going on Netflix to do it, good luck for your children, because it's mostly going to give them messages about what you have more animals and blue people than people of color. And so when talking to children about this, first you have to approach them understanding that they understand. Even before they could talk, they could observe and see things. They could see who you're talking to and what the status of social groups are. And don't treat them like they're ignorant. And treat them like they need information that counteracts that, whatever the negatively stereotyped group is. Give them that positive information. My goal for my research was to figure out, well, where in the world can I find a group of people that have positive attitudes about the negatively stereotyped group? That was my question, right? Because we already learned in the online training, right, that very few people are here. Very few people are at this bottom level where it's like, I have a bias for the negatively stereotyped group. I have a bias for disabled people. I have a bias for Asian American. I have a bias for dark-skinned people. Who has that was my question. Who has a bias for gay people? Who has a bias for Black people in this world that we negatively stereotype those groups? So what I did was I started in Atlanta, right? And we know Atlanta is a very special place in terms of race, in terms of social status of Black people. You can see the whole spectrum in terms of socioeconomic status from the bottom to the top. The mayor's name is Keisha. Good luck having that happen in White Plains, New York. So it's a very interesting dynamic here in Atlanta, okay? in terms of where you can see, how can you see that stereotype about Black people counteracted anywhere? And it does wonders in terms of getting people to that neutral place. So I did the research mostly looking at African Americans, because that's who's falling, and I'm going to go back here, into these groups here. Who has a bias for Black people? Black people are falling into this 6, 4, and 2%. White people very rarely fall into this 6, 4, and 2%. And when they do fall into this 6, 4, and 2%, I already told you I have questions and I want to know what their life experiences have been. They've had Black friends, Black people in their homes who lived with them. They have Black family. They play football. I told you about that in the online training. We know that in the essence of football, we have teamwork. We have brotherhood that comes together. I've also found that people in the South's unconscious biases would surprise you. Okay, I taught in Paulding County, Georgia, which is outside of Atlanta. Okay, Atlanta's one thing, but Paulding County is another thing. And I was surprised. I thought that I was going to be teaching in an area that was stronger in white bias, but it actually surprised me. I have seen stronger biases in very liberal places, right? But then you also have to think about, well, what is the difference? Paulding County, even though it's not far from Atlanta, they still know about Atlanta. They're in very close proximity to Atlanta, where you can see these counteracting messages, right? They've been in school with Black people. Sometimes more so than people in Westchester, New York, right? So we have to think about this in terms of don't get caught up in the hype that just because you're from a liberal woke area in the country, that doesn't mean you're not going to be biased. And I've seen people who, I'm talking Trump Central, you hear me? And you test their unconscious biases, you'd be surprised. So we have to think about this in terms of what we're even learning about politically, right? I don't have all day with you, but I found one way to help particularly older white males, conservative males, particularly from the South, better understand this, is to tap into, if they've had them, experiences in the South with Black people. And in the South, even though there's an ugly experience here, we've kind of been together for a long time here. We got an ugly history here, but I'm from New York and it's very diverse, but you have so many different groups that sometimes, and it's new, right? So many new waves of groups, it can be hard to come together. So just because you have all this diversity does not mean it's going to lead to coming together. It can sometimes make it worse if certain strategies aren't being done. I talked to you all day about this. In terms of gender bias, I wanted to show you this here because those traits, and this study found that not just men associate these traits with women, women do as well. These traits go directly into testing unconscious bias. People see women beliefs about women traits, able to devote themselves to others, aware of others' feelings and understanding, taking care of the children, the home. Men, on the other hand, leaders, head of household, good at numbers. I had a trainee take this list, and it was a little longer than this. I only put a few on here. Take this list back to his wife, who was a statistician. So we already got some counteracting going on there. She's good at numbers. And she took this list and took like what their experiences were and directly calculated their score on the unconscious gender bias test. So what I'm saying there is that your experiences with this, right? Like, do you know women who are good at numbers? Are you one of them? Are you married to one? Do you not? Do you know women leaders and have positive thoughts about that? That goes into how you're going to score on this unconscious bias test. It also goes on how you're judging them in the workplace. So this study looked at, well, who do you see as a good manager? All right. And as you see, most of the time, men were voted to be the good manager or good leader. And why? What made him a good manager? It was the same traits that are going into those stereotypes. So we're describing people, and women do this too. We do this too. And we'll talk about this more in terms of stereotype threat, but we do this when evaluating people, maybe without even realizing it. And we have to be aware. The first step to changing this is to say, all right, I have a bias for men being more aggressive. I have a bias for that. Okay, so when I see a woman being aggressive, that may lead me to not be okay with that. And now I can check myself when that's happening, but that whole process is not gonna take place unless you first realize you have this bias going on. Then you're going to realize how it's going into your everyday interpretations of people and evaluations of them. CNN did show this last night. I was proud of them for that. I had to go to sleep after that because I was like, why didn't they call me? Okay, but I went to bed. I said, maybe I'll have to reach out. They did show this study showing that people at preschool, this is a preschool study, Yale did this, and they tested teachers' unconscious biases and also looked at who they were watching. Like, who are they expecting to cause a problem? The stronger the white bias, the more they watched the black kids. Not just any black kids, the black boys. The kids were playing with Play-Doh, okay? They were not presenting challenging behaviors. But if you track the eyes, they were the ones looked at longer and also expected to do something wrong. If you're expecting something, that power of expectation. And that's where this unconscious bias plays out because it's influencing your expectations and then they play out. We're discriminating in schools, who's going to be gifted, who's going to be promoted. When this playing out from the time I was a child into adulthood. It starts in schools. Who's going to be placed where? Who's going to be when I was a young kid, it was called the WINGS program. I said, well, wow, I want to fly. But there were no black children in the program. My mother literally had to go to the White Plains Public School and say, well, what's going on here? Why isn't she in the WINGS program? They didn't even give me the test. So the teacher had to recommend the students, that's how I think it still pretty much goes the same, to take an IQ test. And then once they passed that, then they could go in the WINGS program and fly. And now I knew that I was in the same groups as the white children because they had already split us into groups in the classroom, reading groups, math groups, and such. So I knew that I was on the similar academic level as them, but when they were pulled out of class to go to WINGS, I wanted to know where were they going, okay? Because I'm supposed to be in whatever groups they're in, I'm supposed to be in that group. And they said they were going to WINGS, so I went home and told my mom that, and she went to the school, told them to at least give her the test, gave me the test, and oh, lo and behold, I'm in WINGS. But that was my first experience with racism. The teacher of WINGS was not too thrilled to see me there. I'm 8 years old. At first, it was not so blatant. It was nonverbal, but I felt it and it felt so bad, but I kept pushing through. But then it was also, I don't want to talk too long because we have time here, but this was during the OJ trial. So, it was a very crazy time period. And she would make it a point to have the trial playing in the class every day. She'd just get so upset. And so I knew something was going on. Okay. But then it got to the point where I'd work really hard on these projects and then she would just lose them and say, I didn't do them. So me and my mom got really tricky. We'd say, you know what? We're going to make 2 of them this time. And back in the day, there was no like PowerPoints and stuff. You had to like get big poster boards and really go to the library, right? So I worked really hard on them, but now I'm making 2 of them just in case she loses one for presentation. Like it was just a mess. But if I found that woman today, I would thank her. I would love to I found her on Facebook and I've held back to really send her a thank you card because I may not be sitting in front of you if I didn't at that age learn how to navigate this and realize it's not me, it's something else going on and I have to keep fighting through this. But who wants to do that at 8, right? And how can that then impact how you see yourself? So that's why I'll talk to you. That's my own personal story, okay? We have a few minutes here left. I have to get to the nitty gritty. This stuff is not going to change unless we take a scientific approach to this. CNN, what they did last night might have set us back 10 years. Okay. If I did a study on the Starbucks training that I looked at one of the videos, Starbucks had everybody take that training, the unconscious bias training, a few years ago. And I looked at the videos they were showing. And just like what's happening now, showing African Americans talking about legit experiences of racial discrimination, not being able to go to the mall without being watched, police brutality. You're watching somebody with a knee on somebody's neck for all that. You're just seeing these images. That information tells you this group is at the bottom. Okay, you better consume something else. I can't even watch it anymore. It's just, it does not give your brain information that's going to make you approach more. And if you do approach, you might be approaching in a way where it's like helpless, hopeless. Okay. So we need new information, because if not, and I think this study is in your resources, we're not going to have any change in this implicit bias stuff for a long time, over 150 years. So we won't be here. Okay. But if we look at what comes out of people's mouths, what they're saying, oh yeah, we're close to change. That's why I'm a little nervous. It looks good what's happening right now. Looks great. Looks great. People on the streets, we're getting change. Companies are making statements. This is great. Okay. But are we going to change unconsciously? How, if we're not getting like new information, new experiences? Diversity is great, but we're going to have to get into this inclusion part. And the last few minutes, and I want to save room so we have questions. And with your students, with your whoever you're working with in the workplace, your colleagues, right? Particularly in the classroom. One way to just let your students know you understand this. Change. What are you teaching them? Who is in the curriculum? Are you showing them themselves? Are you showing them different viewpoints? So what I like to do, I do a 10-week course to see if I can shift these biases. So I test the students before they get in my class, and I get their racial bias. And we were together 10 weeks, twice a week. They have to be with me. And all of my course material are about counteracting the stereotype. It's particularly about race and gender of Black people and women. So we spend the whole 10 weeks, we're learning history, particularly outside of slavery. That alone does it, okay? So if you're just focusing on slavery and that message in there alone, versus even with preschoolers, I do this for Black History Month. Let's just look at Black inventors, Black contributors to society, right? Black people who have done things that have changed this world for the better, not just people in helpless, hopeless situations, because even a 7-year-old doesn't want to hear that. I did a training for children where I do the same stuff, but for kids. And I told the 7-year-old, we're going to talk a little bit about Black history today. He said, oh, no, please, no, I don't want to do it. And he's a Black kid. And he knew already this is going to be horrible. I don't want to do it. So just understanding that letting your students know you have another perspective. Your nonverbal interactions, your silence is everything. So the research shows that this directly, I wanted to go here, goes into your unconscious bias results. One of the main behaviors they're associated with is your nonverbal behaviors. Also things you're not good at controlling. Things that you've developed over a while. Things that are in your DNA as well. So things you got to work on. Personality, nonverbal, unconscious bias, things you've had a while. But if you work on all of them together, that's when we get closer to this neutral place. So the research shows the stronger, let's just use the white bias, the stronger the white bias, the crazier you are looking at Black people. And we feel
Crazier. I love
we feel it. Same thing with men. The stronger or women, right? So say you're that woman who has a bias for women being quiet, not aggressive. Don't curse. If that woman is aggressive and curses, you're going to look at her crazy. Okay? You're going to look at her crazy. Like, what is this? You know? And it's because your bias is not to see a woman like that. Okay? So you need to work. What I tell and I wish I could be with you, because we get interactive in terms of just one-on-one simple things. Work on your face. Smile. I have a neighbor who I know is biased. I mean, I study this stuff. I've looked at it. And Black people, we don't even have to be experts. Women, gay people, we don't have to be experts to pick up on these nonverbal signals people are giving you. But when you're an expert and you study this stuff, it gets a little crazy. You just want to stay inside. Okay. But my neighbors, their silence is deadly. They haven't said anything to me since this whole thing has gone on. No hello. I can't get a hello. Okay. And so when you bring that energy, especially at this time, right? This time we need to be bringing energy of positive. I told my daughter today, she was nervous to go to camp. She said, my friend Penelope is not going to be there. We have a camp here that's open. Just like you can bring 6 kids. I was like, thank God I have to do virtual trainings. I'll be back when I'm done. Right. But she was nervous. She said, I'm not going to have any friends today. I said, baby, just smile. Just smile. You'll make some friends. And that's, if you just work on that. Body postures, gestures. Are you looking at people in the eyes? So the research shows the stronger the bias, the less likely you are even going to look at the person. You don't see them actually. Tone of voice. Oh, goodness. I could be with you for days, but I don't have time. But the nice, gentle tone of voice you have for some people, you may not be giving that to everybody. And if you watch yourself, which people don't do oftentimes because we're on that unconscious autopilot, watch yourself. Observe what you feel yourself. People are just going and they're not taking into note these things. Because if you don't, what's known as, there's a lot of research on the stereotype threat. You're going to arouse people. Okay. It's already hard enough. We understand the stereotype is there as a Black person, as a woman, as a gay person. We're walking into these environments, as Claude Still, who came up with this research, said, it's a threat. Like, oh my gosh, I was threatened when I was 8 years old by this woman. What am I going to do here? You have to learn how to decrease that arousal. Stop your heart from racing so fast so that you can perform, so that you can just be all right. And so one of the things you can do to just reduce that arousal that some of us have been living with since 6 years old, I had to deal with it all the way through graduate school. If I didn't learn by graduate school how to reduce that arousal from people looking at you crazy and treating you differently, how can you perform like that? So you can help reduce that arousal. You want to be an ally? Come into it thinking, I got to reduce arousal. How can I do that? Well, just try, like I told my daughter this morning, smile. Smile at people. You know, get in there and ask them, how are they? How are they? You know, do they need anything? Some people don't want you going into too much with them at this time period. I've heard that. But some people are ready right now to just have conversations. During this virtual world that we're in, you can still see people. I went and got my makeup done and tried to do something with this hair of mine because I know you can see me. Okay, what am I going to wear to the virtual meeting? I wish I didn't have to do that, right? But I do because I'm dealing with people. But try to take that out of your mind. You know, like we're in a crazy time right now. People are stressed. Try not to bring these biases, which you still can do, into these virtual meetings you're having. Make sure you're acknowledging people in the virtual meeting. You can still lack inclusion even in this virtual world. So a lot of clients before this actual racial thing went down were like, oh no, we're going to take a back seat to this stuff right now. But now they're jumping back on like, no, this is important even during COVID. Last one, social distancing. We already are distant because of bias. I told Charlene this. My father, 72 years old. This book here, Invisible Man, if you haven't read it, please read it. It's about a Black man's experience in the South, being invisible. Nobody sees me. Nobody sees me. Oh, I told you my dad integrated schools. He has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder dealing with racism. And he lives in New York, which is a little bit fast-paced and people all over each other. But one way which racism comes out passive-aggressively is I don't see you. I might step on your foot. I don't see you. I'm going to get all in your personal space. I don't see you. And so my father said, thank God for this social distancing. And I felt bad for him. I said, oh, Dad, that's horrible. He was so grateful. I wanted to cry and laugh at the same time because he says, now I don't have to deal with it. So just keep that in mind in terms of we were already socially distant because of it, or acting crazy, being passive aggressive because of our biases. Don't put this on the back burner now. Like, obviously, with what's going on now, I actually made this slide before all of this craziness, but it's more important now than ever for you to keep this stuff at the front of your mind. And you can be socially close, even through the Zoom. Call people, text people, email them. Okay. And then check the behaviors. What works? Counteract, shift group boundaries. This study here, which is in your, resources, and I'm going to send some more, show this is the way to do it. Stop talking about just prejudice and discrimination and people's experiences and slavery and all this. We need to counteract the message, get people together, and you could do this in the workplace. Shift group boundaries through competition. That's that football example, right? You put people on a team, give them something to fight for together or work with together, and they win a prize, and then they become intimate. right? In a way, that's what my dad, intimacy. That's what my dad likes to say about intimacy. And we need intimate relationships, not just these like shallow Facebook things. 3 good books. What are you consuming? Right? You want more on unconscious bias? These are 3 here right now, but I'm also going to send just a list of TED Talks and things you can watch YouTube that are going to give you some new information about social groups. And you probably won't get that right now. It's just going to be slavery and oppression, and we need to just get some new information, get new experiences with people, shift those group boundaries. That is what works. Follow me, please. I'm going to unmute everybody. I wish I had longer with you, and we can maybe set up some follow-up stuff, but this is, you can email me, you can add me. I am here for you personally, professionally, anytime. Let me put people off of mute. Hopefully I can get this to expand. Stop sharing. Charlene, I'm going to put you off first. Can you hear me, Charlene?
I can. So first of all, thank you, Bentley. Yeah, so I had seen you live at Lehigh, and I was so worried that we wouldn't have your spirit virtually, but your spirit absolutely comes through virtually as well. So thank you. If folks do have any questions, we could either send them into the chat or I guess raise your hand, and we can watch for the raised hands. If anyone has any questions in the last minute or two for Dr. Bentley, Dr. Gibson, I'll keep doing that. Bentley.
No, don't you worry. That's fine. I'm unmuting everyone. Oh. Had a strong bias for the minority groups in all 3 tests, despite being oh, I love that. Okay, well, yeah, I see somebody talking. That's awesome. Somebody said they had a strong bias for minority groups in all 3 tests. I see that oftentimes. That goes with personality as well. People will get similar scores on all tests, and that really shows a person who is really like counteracting all groups, all stereotypes. And it's about personality as well. Personality feeds into how you score on all of them. So that's why I have people take multiple tests, because it allows people to see, regardless of the stereotype, very similar.
Can't hear you when everyone's off of mute.
Go on mute. I think it's best to put in the chat since there's so many people. Can we all stay muted? Yeah, that'd be great. If not, if you put the questions in the chat, I will address them in a follow-up email. There's so many folks.
What? I took my car.
I see someone asking, did I find that Black people have a bias? What I found with Black people, it's about 50-50 split. Half have a bias for Black. Unmute a second. Darlene, can you hear me? We can hear you now, I think. You there, Charlene?
I am here.
Okay. All right. So what I think would be a good idea, because there's so many folks, is that we will, if you put the questions into, oh, thank you so much. Oh, thank you. That really makes me feel good. I'm going to copy and paste all of these questions and send an answer directly to Charlene so that I make sure that they all get addressed. So please just keep them going. Put all the questions in there that you have. We have a couple. It's not going to cut us off, so I can see it now, and I can unmute you. Personal question: the gender work test includes gender names. Someone asked if the names are names of members of your personal family members. Could your results be skewed? I think that what handles that is that it's aggregated, so they give you so many different names that one person who's in your family wouldn't skew your results. So it's aggregating all those different trials that it's giving you in that. Thank you. I'd like to participate in in-person training. Yes, please keep in contact with me for in-person trainings. I will send out all of my information so Charlene can share that. Let's see if we have any more. In your research, did you find on average that Blacks also had an unconscious Black bias when they took the race IAT? No. So we're split, I think, half 50-50. It was interesting because the African-American people who I tested in the all-Black college were the ones who did have a Black bias. So African-Americans who grew up in predominantly Black environments, that's when Black biases come in, more so than if you grew up in White Plains, New York. But you're more likely to find a Black person with a white bias than a white person with a Black bias. Can you come? I will come back whenever you all would like me to. Despite, can you repeat what you said about people who score as biased? Yeah, so people who score as biased against white. So people who have a bias for white, the dominant group. It doesn't matter if it's the white, straight, male. I found through my research, personality filters into all of those. So if you're more open-minded, more conscientious, the less biased you are in all of those. So it's really great to take you. Most of you probably saw that you had similar scores. Slight, neutral, or a strong on all three tests. So you can see there's some overlap in just your need to depend on stereotypes in general. Some people are just really stereotype dependent and it's personality based. So really got to work with flexibility. Just be flexible, but that doesn't come just overnight. You got to consume new stuff, get new people in your world. And people are really, it's interesting. We're at a time right now, a lot of people are open to make new friends. They've been in their homes, don't have much to do. I've Zoomed people I haven't spoken to in years. So there's so much you can be doing just from your own home. Oh, God, thank you so much. Y'all are just, I want to stay with you all, but I have to go. Are there any more questions? I'm copying them all. And I have more resources to send you. My college is predominantly white campus. We don't have the option to get people together from different groups on the same team. Okay, this is good. So this is a very good question. My college is a predominantly white campus. It says we don't have the option to get people together from different groups on the same team simply due to lack of diverse crowds. So this is really where partnering comes in. So what I've done with places like Emory in Atlanta is, let's say, well, you have a Black college that's right around the corner. It was so funny because literally Emory and Spelman are like 15 minutes away from each other in Atlanta. And there were so many faculty members who had never even been to Spelman. And so I was just like, let's just go over there. And so then they started having students come take classes. So it's really about partnering. If it's not local schools, local organizations that do have diverse people there who you can get together and work with, right? So there's ways, even if your group, your local group is very homogenous. Now you have to make a strategic effort. Look for women's organizations in your neighborhoods, Black people organizations in your neighborhoods, schools, fraternities, sororities you can partner with. There's plenty of those. So that's the first step I would say to this. And I also help with strategic planning around that. So in terms of now, how do we do these things and who should we partner with? Any other questions? Have you found on your research any influence higher education on shifting bias? So I've actually found that it depends on where the higher education is. So if your higher education is in predominantly white schools and you come from predominantly white environments, and then, so there's no shifting going on there. And then it depends on, well, what classes are you taking in your higher education, right? So that's why I love the study I did with my college students that showed you can shift these biases, right? If you're given the right curriculum. So higher education, it can have a plus, but it depends on who's there and what type of information you're getting. Thank you so much. I think that's the last one. All right, Charlene, I think we'll wrap it up.
All right. Well, so thank you. Thank you again, Bentley. This was great.
So glad.
All those still on the call, let's give her a great thumbs up.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And, for those still remaining, I'll gather all the information from Bentley, and we will having the recording that we will post on our site for those who want to listen to it again. Dana and I will be sending that information out to you. So thank you all for attending today. Thank you again, Bentley.
No worries. Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.